Welcome in. It's Big Ten Today. It is presented by Gatorade. Great to have you with us on this Friday. Dave Revson, Andy Katz. Man, we have had a loaded week here this week. So many good games heading down the stretch here. A ton at stake. You still have, I believe, 11 teams, at least somewhat in this NCAA tourney conversation. It's a ton of fun.
And I'm going to tease what I know you're going to talk about momentarily and say that I think it is great for the state of Illinois, for the Big Ten, for college basketball, that I think we got a real rivalry now with Illinois Northwestern. I mean, it was intense, and I think it's great for everyone involved that both teams are playing well.
We will see where that one goes here in the years to come. It's been pretty one-sided.
That's what I'm saying. Like, the split, you know.
Yeah, but it was certainly a really good scene. It was a great scene when they played in Evanston as well earlier this year. Mike DeCourcy is with us. He has put down the abacus and the slide rule. He has emerged with a new bracket. The smoke is emanating from his chimney, and he is ready to go. Mike, it is, I know, a really busy time for you.
Absolutely. I thought you were going to say the smoke is coming out of my ears, but fortunately, I think we're all here. It is interesting as I get to this time of the year doing the bracket, you start to feel like you're running out of time for everything to start to look like it should. You need, to me, when I look at my bracket, it just doesn't feel like this is what it's going to be like in 2 weeks. And so you feel like you need more time for more games to be played so everything can sort of shape itself out. But I think we'll be there when we get to Selection Sunday.
That's not a very good sell for the bracket you're going to unveil, Mike. You need to tell us you have the perfect bracket and it's ready to go.
I just think that there are certain teams that are performing in ways that say they are, let's say, a 10 seed, but there are certain elements that say they're an 8 seed, and so I need them to pick one lane or the other is kind of what I'm saying.
All right. Well, we'll get to the bracket in a bit. Let's get to our big story, though. It is last night's results in the Big Ten. Andy talked about that Illinois Northwestern game. It was a great one. The Illini overcame an 18-point halftime deficit, beat the Wildcats by 4. Terrence Shannon, 24 of his 26 in the second half. Boo Buie had 35 for the Cats, but everyone else had 27. Michigan tops Rutgers. Wolverines have won 5 of 7. They look to make a late push, and Penn State wins a game it could not afford to lose, a 4-point victory in Columbus. Big Ten standings is now a 4-way tie for third. Maryland and Indiana, as you can see, have the tiebreakers as of now, so they would get the double byes in Chicago, along with Purdue and Northwestern. Penn State would still have to play on Wednesday by virtue of a sweep at the hands of Wisconsin. But again, you've got 9 teams with either 8, 9, or 10 wins. There is a ton still up for grabs. Let's get to the games from last night. And Mike, I want to start with you. The game we were talking about, Illinois, incredible second half against Northwestern. Terrence Shannon Jr. was just great. And Sincere Harris really changed the game on the defensive end as he locked down as best as he could on Boo Buie. This was an impressive second half showing from the Illini.
Dave, I've talked to a number of people in a number of capacities, coaches, administrators, fans, and not even Big Ten fans, but just fans generally, about the most enigmatic team, the team you don't know what you're going to get from night to night. And this was Illinois' season in one capsule because you didn't know what you were going to get from half to half. I know Terrence Shannon had foul trouble in the first half, and that was a factor. But for him to go from scoring 2 points in the first half to scoring 24 in the second, in a game where his team needed every single one of them, was just astounding. And that's, I think Illinois could do amazing things in the Big Ten tournament and in the NCAA tournament. They have size. They have playmakers, they have shooting, they have depth, they have a lot of things that you want, but they need to be more consistent about applying those elements because we saw in the second half what they're capable of. They came back from 18 down against a terrific defensive team. They put themselves in a position where they really could not be stopped. No matter what Northwestern tried, they could not stop what Illinois was performing on the floor. I was really impressed by what they did, and I would love to see that more. Like I always say, nobody plays 40 great minutes, but if they could play 35 or 34, I think they can beat just about anybody.
So first on Illinois, I agree with Mike. couple things. One, as we've seen, no concussions are the same, no two concussions. Remember last year, Andre Cabello, he could not come back quick enough from it, and that's understandable. Here's Terrence Shannon, concussion protocol, doesn't practice much, comes back a little shaky at the beginning of the game, and bam, 24 or 26. Really impressive with what he just had to deal with, missing those last couple of games. The fact that Sincere Harris comes in, and Jaden Epps did not play well and sort of disappeared after he played those 14 minutes. And Harris gives him great energy, defense, makes a big shot. So that shows the depth, because also we got to remember, this is now, a month without Sky Clark, who was part of the rotation. So within the season, they had to figure out who's playing when, where, how many minutes. And here was an example where Harris took the baton of, okay, it's my turn, and I'm going to run with it. And in the postgame last night, Brad Underwood talked a lot about how he basically changed the game. While Shannon, yes, gave him the scoring, it was Harris's effort and energy that really lifted up Illinois. And I agree with Mike. Like, if we see this Illinois team, if Shannon can carry them to this degree, then yes, this is a team that can go a couple of rounds.
And this is a team, remember, they beat Texas, they beat UCLA on neutral courts. Last we checked, the NCAA tournament's played on neutral courts. So again, this is a team we know what the upside is, but as you guys have said, inconsistent. Northwestern, really tough to see how it went down the stretch for them. Boo Buie was incredible, but you need someone else to come along with you. They had won 5 games in a row. They had arguably the greatest week in Northwestern basketball history. You're not going to win every single game, and yet this is one, Mike, they had every opportunity to win and just, fouled three-point shooters, were 8 of 20 on layups and dunks, just did a lot of things you can't do in that second half.
Yeah, there were 2 things that I thought impacted the comeback, and one was shot selection and not paying attention to the clock. When you have an 18-point lead going into the second half, I don't think that's a bad thing to make sure that you're shooting late in the clock. I've always theorized that there are times when a shot clock violation is a better thing than maybe a 7-second shot, 7 seconds into a possession, and you're launching a shot. So I thought they failed there, and I thought that it was disappointing to see some of the defensive decisions that were made. There was one cross on the right wing where Ty Berry went with the cutter instead of guarding the ball, and the ball was right there outside the three-point line. It might have been Harris that had the ball. I can't remember. It might have been Shannon, but it was somebody dangerous with the ball outside the three-point line, and instead of standing with the ball after the initial exchange, he goes and takes the cutter into the corner, who was not in a dangerous position because the ball was right there, and he lets it go, and all of a sudden there's a wide open three, and it gets connected, and this was in a key element of the game. I just think those kinds of mistakes can't be made when you're trying to protect a lead like the one that the Wildcats had.
All right, so look, I'm going to say for everyone to just settle down and take a breath. Look, long-suffering Red Sox fan growing up, I remember 75 and 86 and 03 before they won in 04. We're in Chicago. Cub fans have done the same thing with the World Series. Northwestern fans, to me, are like Cubs and Red Sox fans. They can't believe it until it actually happens. They had 3 home wins that are on the shelf with Purdue, Indiana, and Iowa that no one expected them to get. They've got that working for them. They still are in second place. I still believe they're going to get the double bye. I know they have a difficult schedule. I'm not worried about them. I'm not, because every Big Ten team, including Purdue, has had a mini slide. And I just think this team is different. I think they're wired different. I agree with you. They need a second person. I think it can be Brooks Barnheiser more than Chase Adige in terms of another score. He had a big-time bucket, that little baby hook, that was huge for them. Now, they didn't end up finishing it off, but I thought that was a big confidence boost for them. I'm not worried about them.
No, to your point, look, I think they're safely in the NCAA tournament, but this is a really difficult schedule here, as we've been talking about, 3 of the last 4.
But so were those 3 home games.
No doubt. No, again.
And they won them all.
Yeah, no doubt. They won 5 in a row. Again, I just think, it's tough. You got to go to Maryland next. Maryland hasn't lost a Big Ten home game all year.
But now the Rutgers game at the end of the season may be more winnable.
Yeah, well, that's for sure. Rutgers is struggling, and so let's transition to them. Michigan does get the win at Rutgers, starting to put it together here. Let's focus on the Michigan part of this first, Mike. Without Jett Howard, still out with that ankle injury, man, that young backcourt was tremendous. Doug McDaniel, Kobe Buffkin has been good all year. He's really kind of come into his own here. but Michigan, impressive win on the road they needed to have.
Yeah, about a month and a half ago, we saw Doug McDaniel on our Sunday era, the day we do Beyond, and had a breakout game. And it was easy to think that, okay, from here on, I mean, he's not going to play every game great, but from here on, we're going to see this Doug McDaniel. And it didn't really happen. We saw more of the Doug McDaniel who was still developing and still struggling. But he's coming along at the absolute right time when they have a chance to do things in March. I mean, you look at the Big Ten tournament, and right now there's no one that you look at and say there's no way Michigan can beat that team. Certainly Purdue is outstanding, and Indiana is terrific, and Northwestern, all that. But Michigan goes out there, and they have Hunter Dickinson, which means right away they have one of the 2-3 best players on the floor. And if McDaniel plays this way, and then you add Jett Howard back into the mix, I think that at that point, Michigan becomes an extremely dangerous team. And understandably, of all the teams in this league now, they are the most desperate. I think Wisconsin and Penn State are in the same category, more or less. But Michigan is the most desperate because they can't afford any missteps at all if they want to make the NCAAs. They have to continue to win. So that's not a great combination for the opposition, and it certainly wasn't for Rutgers last night. Michigan played like they really wanted that victory.
Yeah, there's no question that I think if the NCAA tournament started tomorrow and Michigan was in, you could say that Michigan, could be a team that's going to win a couple games. I mean, they have the talent to do so. Yeah. They got to get in. But I would not be shocked at all if they're playing on Saturday at the United Center in the semis. They have the talent to do that. Could they end up obviously in Dayton if they get in and win a couple games? Sure. No Jett Howard. Joey Baker struggled last night, but he did hit 2 threes, but he's 2 of 11. But he's another guy that has had his moments at times. And talk about last night for Northwestern, a game they wish they could have. They were right there to win. If Michigan had beaten Indiana, I mean, they were right there, 62-61 with a shot to win it. Right. I think the narrative would have changed even more. But then they come back, they beat Michigan State, they win this road game. They are trending in the right direction at the right time.
Absolutely are. They held Rutgers to 45 points in this game, which is the fewest they've allowed in a Big Ten conference game this century. That being said, Rutgers kind of aided and abetted a little bit here, Mike. I mean, the turnovers were extremely costly. The free throw line was tough to watch, frankly. It just feels like this team is in a funk. They have not played well since Mawot Mag's injury. How concerned are you about Rutgers?
Very. If you think about it, not only the Mag injury, but I believe there were some games even prior to that when the offense wasn't working. They haven't scored effectively since the Minnesota game that basically opened February. They got 90 in that game. It was like they spent the entire February allotment on that game. They have not been hitting the 70-point mark of late. You saw a circumstance in which they obviously shot poorly from the free throw line, and it's hard to ignore that when that's out there. But they shot 41% last night on 2-point attempts. 41% on 2-point attempts. I mean, that's worse than missing all your free throws. You should be able to approach 50% from 2-point range in just about every game you play if you're playing effectively. And they were nowhere near that. And so they shot poorly from every distinction, foul line, 3-point line, and the 2-point. But the 2-point's the one that stands out to me. Michigan's a very fine defensive team. They have a lot of good metrics to back that up. But to shoot that number, you really have to be taking poor shots, not running great offense, and playing into the defense's strengths.
It's all offense because usually the magic number for them is keep their opponent under 65. They did that. Michigan only scored 58 points. Oscar Palmquist, 1 for 3. Cam Spencer struggled again, 1 for 3. These are 3-point numbers. Andre Hyatt didn't give him anything. He was 0 for 4. Caleb McConnell comes back after missing the last game with back spasms. He was ineffective. They simply have to score better, shoot better, if they're going to make it. And I hate to say it, there's a bit of a flat tire on the bus I've been driving. They got to win some games here.
Yeah.
Because offensively, they are really struggling. As these other ones are trending up, it's not crazy to think. I know you had them as a 7 in your last bracket, Mike. They could be out in a couple weeks.
We'll get into Mike's bracketology. I'm not sure it's flat. There may be a slow leak. You might want to check it, like maybe they got a nail on the turnpike or something. You may want to give it a look. I do want to talk about Penn State, Mike. They were just in a situation last night where you just can't afford to lose that Ohio State game, as crazy as it seems. right? I mean, the Ohio State, I don't know what to say. Somehow it's a quad one win. It's like Oprah giving away the cars at this point. You get a quad one win and you get a quad one win. But still, it is. And Penn State got it. They figured out a way to get the win. They're fantastic on offense once again. Just doing what they need to do. You just have to win that game.
Yeah, I go back to when they played Wisconsin at home and they lost in overtime. And in that final 3 minutes of regulation, Jalen Pickett did not attempt a single shot. And as I was watching the game, I kept wondering why the ball was not in his hands and why he wasn't being allowed to dictate those final minutes. And after that, since that game, he has averaged 28 points. In the four games that they've played since then, 28 points, and that includes the 30-plus and 40-plus game he put up. It's been a different Jalen Pickett, and as a result, a different Penn State. Everything has to go through him. That doesn't mean every single set, but every single set in crunch time should go through him, and he should be given the opportunity to do that. And I think he's embraced that, and Penn State has embraced that, and that's why they've become more dangerous down the stretch, as well as sort of a much greater threat to make the NCAAs now. If you look at the first four out on my bracket, it is not an impressive list. They have about as good a resume as any of the teams in front of them. One of them happens to be, well, they have a better resume than North Carolina, but North Carolina is still North Carolina, so you got to give them, you got to leave the door open for them. But I think Penn State, I think the opportunity is there for them if they continue to perform like they did last night, like they have the last 2 weeks.
Look, I'm going to draw the parallel between Penn State and Michigan because I think Penn State, again, getting into the Big Ten tournament, wherever they're going to be seated, I would not be shocked if Jalen Pickett led them to a Saturday semifinal, much like Indiana last year, and that got them into the tournament, into the first four. And if you look at the four teams we just discussed, Wisconsin, Michigan, Penn State, and Rutgers, I would say Penn State and Michigan are the two teams I have the most faith in could actually get in the NCAA tournament and win games.
Yeah, I think Rutgers is really, really well constructed to win games in the NCAA tournament, right? It's just so different than what you typically face. They've got this 5 guys out who can all beat you from behind the three-point arc. So, yeah, they're a team.
You mean Penn State?
Oh, what did I say?
You said Rutgers.
Oh, I said Rutgers. Penn State, I'm sorry. Yes, really well constructed just because of the way they shoot the three, right? Those are the teams that are incredibly dangerous as we head into March Madness. You just got to get there.
Yes.
Mentioned Mike's latest bracket. Here it is. 9 teams from the Big Ten came out this very morning. Purdue is still a 1 seed. Indiana moving down a spot from Tuesday. Northwestern held steady. Iowa, Illinois are 7 seeds. Rutgers is down a spot to an 8, along with Maryland and Michigan State. So the Big Ten has 3 of the 8 seeds in this bracket. Wisconsin, the last team in. Penn State, the 3rd team out. So we've talked about some of these teams. We're going to dive into a little bit more detail here on a number of them. Let's start with Purdue. And, Mike, it wasn't that long ago they were the #1 overall seed in your bracket. Now they are the last of the 1 seeds. What do they need to do to hold on to this more tenuous spot?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think that they should think of this affirmatively. And what can they do to get back what they want, which is to play in Louisville in the South region? And the first element of that is that Alabama has to lose. And that's plausible. They have some games that they could lose without a doubt. So that's first step. And then the second step is you're talking about a team in Purdue that has a big home game on Saturday evening against Indiana. That's huge. They have a second home game against Illinois. They play at Wisconsin. So those are all games that a #1 seed should win. If you lose one of them, you put yourself in jeopardy of getting knocked off that line. And remember, the Big Ten at a slight disadvantage because the conference championship game at the late start on Sunday would not be considered, whereas somebody like UCLA, if they were able to sweep through the Pac-12 tournament and, say, beat an Arizona in a title game, that game will go into the seeding discussion and into the bracket discussion. So that's the disadvantage that Purdue has relative to some of the other teams. So I think if they win their 3 remaining regular season games, they're in great shape to keep their 1. And you root, if you're a Boiler, you root against Alabama, and maybe they can get Louisville back.
You have 9 quad 1 wins. Only Kansas has more nationally. Let's go to Northwestern here. And Andy was talking about, everyone take a deep breath and all that. I don't think it's unreasonable, given kind of the history, that Northwestern supporters might look at this very difficult schedule and say, what happens if they lose them all? So, Mike, what happens if they lose them all? Are they still in the tournament?
Oh, absolutely. There are some people ask me all the time, are we a lock? And the answer to that is always, can you lose all the rest of your games and still be in the tournament? And sometimes the answer, even for a team in Northwestern's position, you might say no. Like if you were playing 3 teams that were out of the show and not a factor, and you were taking 3 bad losses, maybe that would dent them. But at Maryland, Penn State, at Rutgers, those are all quad 1 games. They are all difficult games. I should say that 2 of them are quad 1. The Penn State home game would not be. So they could, but I don't think that's what Northwestern wants to do. I think they want to try to continue to fight to hold that 6 line and maybe even to climb. If they had finished off the Illinois game, I think they would have been fighting and scratching for a top 4 seed at that point. Not being able to do that left them in a position where they were knocked down. But I still think they have some fight in them, and they have the opportunities I described where you could still make some progress.
Again, they have 8 quad 1 wins. They have 6 road wins. The only other teams that can make that claim nationally are Kansas and Purdue. They have a really good resume. Let's get into Iowa. They are down a spot to 7. They were brutal in these last couple of games, and they are one of the teams in the Big Ten, and there are a few of them. Maryland's the other one that comes to mind right away, that is so much better at home than they are on the road. How big a factor is that as you assess them in the tourney?
Yeah, I think that's a factor. It's certainly an issue for them and some others that are in this discussion. What's interesting about Iowa is that 11 of their 17 wins are against the top 2 quadrants. That's pretty rare for teams that are certainly rare for a team that's in the 7-seed conversation, and pretty rare for the tournament generally. Most of the teams are piling up a lot of victories. You look at somebody like Duke that has more than half of their victories down in quad 4. So that's helping Iowa a lot. What hurts them is that the predictive metrics are not great. The results metrics are not great. They're looking at 34 in the predictive category and 42 in the results metrics. So none of the numbers really love them. But then you look at their quad numbers, the quad results that they have, and they're terrific by the standards of a team that's sort of in the middle of the field. So it's hard to judge, but if we go based on what the committee said, we're trying to read the Dead Sea Scrolls there, and what the committee suggested was that they are impressed by significant wins. And Iowa has a bunch of those, and certainly they still have the opportunity with Michigan State and at Indiana to get a couple more.
And 2 of those last 3 at home. They have Nebraska at home as well, in addition to that game against the Spartans. A really good win for Illinois last night. They are holding steady at a 7. We talked about kind of the up and down nature of this team. Is what stands out, though, the fact that, hey, this is a team that beat UCLA, beat Texas. I mean, that to me really reinforces this resume.
Yeah, that's what's been holding them up for a long time, and that's what keeps them out of that 8-9 range occasionally. But then when they come with a result like last night, they jump right back out, and that's really what they have to do. They have 3 games left at Ohio State, which is that quad 1 win you talked about earlier. Then they have Michigan and at Purdue. I don't think anybody expects that they have to go into Purdue and win that game, but it wouldn't be bad to give a good performance and leave a good impression. I think a lot of what happens with them seeding-wise is going to be dictated by consistency of performance in these last 3 and however many games they can deliver in Chicago. I think if they show that, I think the committee will invest in this team because of those 2 earlier wins that you talked about.
I do want to ask you about Maryland as well, in the same vein as Iowa. Again, they have 1 conference road win. It's at Minnesota. They still go to Ohio State and Penn State. They have Northwestern at home coming up this weekend, really big game that we'll talk about here in a bit. But is it important that Maryland wins one of these road games? Again, not to get in, I don't think, but just to kind of show the committee that, hey, we actually can do this?
Yes, absolutely. I think that that's important. And again, these are not the kinds of road wins that you'd love to have. Only one of the 2 is contending for a tournament bid, that being Penn State on the final day. But it does give you the chance to significantly change what your road record looks like on your team sheet. 2 wins to 4 wins is a big difference. You're a lot closer to 500. I think if you got yourself to 4, I believe the 4 and 7. If you got yourself to that, I think the committee members would look right past that number. It wouldn't move them at all, especially if you were able to add to your neutral count, which isn't bad at this point. I think they would just shrug at that and just move on to all the good things that there are about Maryland, like their predictive metrics, and obviously the win over Purdue being the crowning achievement. So that's why those 2 games are really important for the Terps over the next week and a half.
Let's get into the bubble teams. Let's consider Wisconsin and Penn State first. And I do want to emphasize they are not just compared to one another. They are compared to the entire field. However, I do think it's instructive when you've got one team that's barely in and one team that's barely out. It is instructive to kind of talk about them relative to one another just so that people can understand, okay, what is it about Wisconsin that is better than Penn State? Is it simply that Wisconsin's beaten them twice head-to-head, or is there more to it than that?
Oh, there's much more to it than that. It's interesting. If you look at Wisconsin's net number, that's what kind of gets in the way of them being comfortably in the field. And we've seen teams beat that net number before and get in. And Rutgers a year ago was in that ballpark. St. John's has done it. So it has happened to be deep into the net rankings and get into the field. But it still is glaring. But then you look at their quad numbers. They have 5 quad 1 wins and 5 quad 2 wins. There are teams that are in the top third of the field that would love to have that many high quad victories. There are teams that would die for that, and they don't have it, and Wisconsin does. So all Wisconsin has to do from now until the end of basically the end of their case, what they have in the regular season and what they have in the conference tournament, is do what's expected of them, and they're going to be in the conversation. Don't take any bad losses, and you're in the ballpark. And if you add a couple of quality wins, then how can they say no to 12 quality wins when they're sitting down to decide who goes in?
What about Michigan? Michigan, I know it doesn't sound great, but Michigan has 3 quad 1 wins. You brought up North Carolina earlier. North Carolina has 0. 0. I mean, it is so hard to play in a power conference and have 0 quad 1 wins, and yet here they are. They are doing it. They are defying the odds. I get that those 2 played in Charlotte, and I get that North Carolina won the game, but it's just head-scratching to me, and you are far from alone, right? Everyone who does this has North Carolina ahead of Michigan right now and has North Carolina in the discussion and doesn't really have Michigan in the discussion. Help me understand why Michigan is where they are, again, relative to Carolina, but just kind of relative to this whole thing.
I think there's a couple things. One is that Carolina hangs where they hang because everybody is concerned that they might go out and beat Virginia and Duke, and then what do we do with them? And so you keep them in the ballpark. And the other thing is, if they do go out and beat Virginia and Duke, what will the committee do? Because they're North Carolina, because we've seen that group in the championship game as recently as 11 months ago. I think there's just this feeling like you don't want to turn your back on Carolina and they'll sneak up on you. So that's what has them there. Look, I'm fully confessing, if their name were Utah, yes, they would not be on that line.
Thank you.
It's that simple. But again, it's not us. It's not me saying that they are the second best team.
I understand everything that you're saying. I get it. I think it's really hard. All you're trying to do is replicate the process, right? That is your task. Your task right. is not to evaluate. Your task is to figure out how the committee thinks historically and try to replicate that based on the information that's in front of you. But it absolutely boggles my mind. And I think Hubert Davis is one of the great people on planet Earth. So I would love to see him in, but they have done nothing to warrant it at this point. Big Ten hockey standings heading into the final weekend of conference play. You got 4 teams, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, and Notre Dame, still all technically in the hunt for second place. You see where Michigan State is, and you say, well, why not Michigan State? They don't play this weekend, so they cannot move up. Minnesota has secured the regular season championship. And so now we look at the scenarios for the Big Ten tourney. The Gophers are the 1 seed. Wisconsin is the 7. Remember, seeds 2, 3, and 4 get home ice in the quarterfinals. Ohio State is guaranteed of being one of the top 4. Michigan can get there with a single point this weekend. Penn State could get there by defending its home ice against the Badgers. Michigan State needs a lot of help, and Notre Dame needs wins and a lot of help. Paul Caponigri is here. Let's start with this before we get into kind of the micro of each one of these matchups. How important is the 2 seed?
It's big because of you get the home ice in the semifinal.
Okay.
So you got to win your quarterfinal, obviously, but Minnesota clearly has the 1 seed. They're getting home ice, but then the 2 seed, if they were to win their quarterfinal, they get home ice for the other semifinal. So that's what separates second from third, fourth for home ice advantage.
Okay, so and the 2 seed has made every Big Ten final since 2016. So to your point, it has made a huge difference.
It's gone chalk, yeah.
Being the 2 seed. Who do you think needs it most of that group of 4 that's still competing for it?
Needs it the most is probably Notre Dame because of the NCAA part. Because that means if they win their 2 games this weekend against Michigan, they're going to vault up quite a bit in that race. So in terms of need, it's Notre Dame. Who I think is going to win it, that's a different story.
Right. Notre Dame's done well, though, historically in Ann Arbor. They won
have.
7 of their last 8 at Yost, so we'll see whether or not they can pull that off. What about this from Michigan's point of view? Right. So we know kind of the Irish are coming in desperate. They're really teetering in the pairwise, right? I mean,
they're 500. They've just been that split kind of team all year.
Got to figure out a way to win those games in Ann Arbor, and as you say, kind of solidify themselves as an NCAA team. Michigan, we know, obviously, clearly is an NCAA team. What does this weekend mean from their point of view?
You know, you'd love to see them healthy. They're so close to there, but then Thursday last week, Luke Hughes gets their best player. And I think he's the one guy at Michigan they can't lose. I mean, they've lost Adam Fantilli, who's going to maybe win the Player of the Year award, but Luke Hughes is the anchor of that team. And you saw a little difference in their play. Their power play wasn't very good on Saturday against the Buckeyes in Cleveland, and he's the guy. So if you can get him back and they have Jacob Truska, they'd have their whole team, and that'd be the first time all year. So for them, it's be healthy. So is he playing this week, or do you save him for the playoffs? Because obviously that's more important. But for me, it's all about health for Michigan.
And again, home ice is really important.
Yeah,
Michigan,
I mean,
yeah.
Yes,
yeah,
I think
right.
I think they're going to get it. If I was predicting things for the weekend, I think they're going to get that 1 point.
And they have won 5 straight home games. Yeah, 1 point does not seem like it
1
is,
out of 6.
Yes,
Yeah.
too tough a hill to climb. What about Ohio State, Minnesota? I find this really interesting because we know Ohio State, as we mentioned already, is home ice for the quarterfinals. But again, you still have a chance to get up and maybe grab that 2 seed. Minnesota, in some ways, doesn't really have a whole lot to play for.
Right.
However, you're number 1 in the pairwise right now, and that is incredibly important in terms of the NCAA tournament.
Yes.
So what's the balancing act here? You've wrapped up the Big Ten. You want to be healthy and rested going into the Big Ten tournament, and yet you also want to be number 1.
Yeah, I think with the way the tournament is spread out over 3 weekends, and they're not playing next week, if I'm coach, I'm full go with my lineup. Both days, The question is, you have Brock Faber coming back from an injury. He might play. Maybe you only play him Saturday. You don't play him Friday. Just get him a game, though. It's most likely his kind of senior night. He's a junior, but there's a good chance he leaves. So maybe he plays Saturday and does kind of like the senior day stuff. But regardless, next weekend, they're off. And then the next week, they only have 1 game, the way it is. So if I'm Minnesota, I'm playing everybody, and we're going to win as much as we can. The intensity level, will they bring it as much? Because in Ohio State will be a little more desperate. They played well last week against Michigan, so they should have some confidence on the road. So I think Minnesota is go, but we'll see how intense they are knowing where we're at.
Tall task for Ohio State. They've won 3 times ever in Minneapolis.
Yeah,
they did win
not
that
an
last
easy
year.
place. Yeah,
it's not
an easy.
No, yeah, so they're not alone in struggling in the Twin Cities. Penn State hosts Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Other than the obvious of trying to get home ice, what do you want to see here from Penn State?
They need some good vibes. They've won 2 of their last 10 games. Last weekend they got blown out Friday, played well Saturday, had the lead late in the game, lost that lead late and then lost in overtime. So I don't know where their confidence is. So to get a couple wins against Wisconsin, who they need to play, nothing against Wisconsin, but they have not won a road game in conference play all year. So this is a remedy kind of for Penn State. If they can get a sweep this weekend, feel better about themselves going into the playoffs.
Penn State could still finish anywhere from 2nd to 6th. Win both games, you've got home ice for the quarters.
That's their kind of the carrot hanging out for them.
Absolutely. So studio for you?
Studio Saturday.
Okay. All right.
That Notre Dame Michigan game, the last of the season, could come down and make a lot of difference.
Yeah. All right. So some huge stuff coming up. We've got doubleheader.
Yes.
Coming
Ohio
up
State,
tomorrow
Minnesota
here
first.
on the Big Ten Network, and Cappy will be there. Thanks a lot, man.